And welcome back. This is Criminal Law 1, Part 2. Part 2. So here's what we'll talk briefly about elements of law. I'll probably try to keep this one a little bit shorter, and that last one run about 45 minutes. I won't take too much of your time. All right. Elements of a crime. So first real slide here outlines what those are. Criminal act, intent, concurrence, and causation. Each of those must be present at the same time for a crime to exist. So criminal act, sometimes called actus reus, requires an actual act. Basically what that means is you can't punish states or thoughts. Usually this is a good source of discussion in classroom. If you guys want to get into that, we could. What we're talking about here is status offenses. Status offenses can be criminalized for juveniles, but not for adults. So here, and I give an example is being drug addicted or diseased or something like that. Thoughts, without getting too hyperbolic and starting talking about thought crimes and that kind of stuff. You can think back to the height of the Cold War and people who might have faced punishments for supporting one type of party or supporting some type of thought, those types of things. Where this would really get in the conversation is expressing those thoughts, because words and thoughts are near synonymous, and depending on the words that you use, you can be held liable for that and criminally liable. And drawing that line is one that our society is currently working on quite heavily, and we'll see where that goes. Odds are it probably won't be somewhere good. I'm kind of pessimistic on my views there. When we start talking about acts, possession is an act. You're in the act of being in possession of something. Typically, we're talking about drugs or other prohibited substances, contraband. That is to say, if you were in the possession of stolen goods, you don't know that they're stolen. It's still a criminal act. You are still guilty of possessing. Failure to act, acts of omission, can be also criminalized. Basically, if you're as good Samaritan laws, if you could have acted, if it wasn't something that would put you in danger, that kind of thing, then you may have an obligation to help. And if you choose not to, then you may be held criminally liable for that. Involuntary acts are generally not criminal. When you start talking about involuntary acts, you take like drinking and driving, or the most common example. Are you responsible for your behavior? It's like yes and no. So you were in a different state of mind, different status, and that's what caused the accident. However, did you choose to get drunk, and was that a reasonable conclusion that engaging in that behavior might lead to what caused the eventual crime? And at that point in time, you can be held liable for. That's sort of the justification for why we have the laws that we do in that regard. You start looking at the reasonable consequences for one's actions. Start looking, to some degree, start looking at some of the levels of intent we'll get into in a second. Basically, were you negligent in some way? I ran down the hall swinging my arms wildly. It was a heavily populated, and there were a lot of people in the hall. Yeah, I hit a few of them, I assaulted them, but it wasn't like I did it on purpose. I was just swinging my arms around having fun. It's like, yeah, you're still responsible for that. That's about that. Proof of an act, corpus delicti, body of a crime, basically talking corroborating evidence. Same with that. You can also kind of associate that with harm to some degree. That's another element that isn't specifically outlined here, but it is an element there that would have to be established that there is proof that some harm has taken place. Some textbooks break these things out differently, the elements. But for purposes of this, we'll just stick to act, intent, concurrence, and then causation, and then that for elements. All right, that mentions here also not always tangible. Murder for hire might not have tangible body of crime. It might just be a conversation or something like that. The more evidence that you have is better, but it's not always going to be tangible. I mean, look at the whole range of electronic, computer-based crimes, internet-based crimes. You're not going to have something tangible. You're going to have a bunch of information on it from it. Intent. So this is the important. Why is this important? Because it is the most difficult to prove. You very seldom are going to have a direct expression of someone's intent that you can, unless you're talking like confessions. That's the only time that you're really going to get this person stated explicitly this, and you're not looking to build up proof to basically use circumstantial evidence to identify what level of intent they actually had when they did it. Okay. Here it talks a little about general versus specific. So general is willful commission of act. Specific is basically start moving up more higher up on the scale. So 4 levels here: negligently, recklessly, knowingly, and purposefully. So negligent, you just weren't paying attention kind of thing. Recklessly is you're doing something that you know is dangerous and that caused a harm. Knowingly, you knew what you were going to do. You knew your actions were going to cause a certain level of harm. Purposefully is you did it with that specific purpose. To kind of put it out in another way, is murder is something most people are familiar with. Is it a negligent homicide where someone you're driving down the street, you're not paying attention, you run someone over? It's like that can be a negligent way of committing homicide. Were you swerving all over the road? You ran up on the curb and ran someone over, you lost control of the vehicle. That would be reckless. Did you see a person in the stoplight and decide to gun it? It's like, okay, and then you start getting into knowingly and purposefully. Knowingly would be that you knew that was going to be the outcome. Purposely is you did it on purpose. So it's like knowingly would be more along the lines of you saw a person starting to enter the crosswalk and you just kept going, and that's whenever you ran them over. Yeah, I did not brake. I was going on my path, but purposely was you gunned it kind of thing. We'll come back to this in a second because I want to have a little bit of a conversation about how all these things fit together beyond just concurrence. So concurrence here is where they talk about that these things must align. Your intent and the act that was actually taken that caused some type of harm are all focused on the same thing. So here, okay. So I'll use one of my old professors to give examples. Okay. Guy kicks into his ex-girlfriend's apartment, kicks the door in, has a gun, runs in, pulls the gun out, aims it right at her, and she's backed up right next to the window. She's on like the 3rd or 4th floor balcony. Just as he goes to shoots, he flinches, he misses, and that bullet then goes into, we'll say, someone in the next building over and kills them. It's like, what level of murder are we talking about? It's like, would you say that was purposefully? Would you say that was just knowingly? Are we talking murder, in the 1st degree, murder in the 2nd degree? Like, which one would that be? Well, your intent wasn't to shoot someone else, it was to shoot the person in front of you. It just so happened that it went that other direction. Another example would be, you're on your way to kill Bob. You're going to, you got an axe in the backseat of your vehicle, and you're gonna hack down Bob. On your way there, it's rainy, and you're having a hard time seeing, and as it's raining real hard, you accidentally run somebody over because you distracted with your thoughts, premeditated thinking about how much you're gonna hack Bob into little bits. Well, just so happens that the person you ran over is dead and it's Bob. It's like, no, it's not a concurrence. I also mentioned your year and a day rule. That's an older rule, more historic. It was that if you created an action, you had a year and a day for concurrence to still be in effect. So it's like think back to shootouts in the Old West kind of things. Like you shot Curly Bill, he lingered on for 8 more months before he died. It's like, yeah, you're still talking murder. It would have been more than a year and a day. It's like, maybe not. What you need to think now, what it's moving more towards is the intervening acts. So basically what you're talking about is that criminal act itself was a sufficient factor, a substantial factor in the outcome. You're talking death, harm, whatever specific statute you want to get into. Concept that's sometimes used as but for concept. What's a but for? I almost won't put in that joke. I won't do that. But for, this would cause this. This wouldn't have happened, but for this. If it weren't for Johnny's actions, this wouldn't happen. Like if it weren't for, I almost won't put it in. I'm starting to feel a little spry. I'm gonna put it in a joke about that civil trial. If it weren't for Johnny's being late to a party, Amber never would have. Never would have crapped the bed. No, that would be a good example. Let's see. A good example would be of an intervening act. We'll talk about intervening acts because that's where you have that break. Okay, so let's say you have trying to think of a name. Say Billy Bob. Okay, Billy Bob. He used a club on his. He has an enemy by the name of Ringo, whatever. So Billy Bob clubs Ringo. Ringo ends up needing surgery on his spine because he's at risk of becoming paralyzed. He was beaten so badly that shattered spine, that kind of stuff. Has surgery. Dies on the surgery table. It's like, okay. Who's responsible for that death? It's like, that's not always clear cut. That can be a pretty gray area to be identifying. Okay, what was the likelihood he would have died? But for that, the Billy Bob's initial beating of him. Okay, so you got a substantial factor there. Okay, but there was medical malpractice. This type of surgery was relatively routine. It wasn't only because of the dirty utensils, the dirty tools that caused an infection that caused Ringo's death, that Ringo died. That would be an intervening act that would that would keep that death from falling on to the criminal act. So it wouldn't be murder. You'd be talking about some type of aggravated battery. Attendant circumstances. So attendant circumstances are other facts you have to prove around a crime. So these are things that have to be proved. You have to have. So basically, we start talking about. I don't think I get into it on here specifically. Aggravating and mitigating circumstances are examples of this. So aggravating circumstances are things that make a situation worse. And mitigating are things that make it less so. All general elements of a crime to exist with being able to prosecute a crime. We'll get to that in a second. So let's say you got a robbery. Person is being forcibly taken of their wallet, their money, their shoes, whatever. And aggravating circumstances associated with that. Is there a weapon present? Yeah, the guy pulled out a gun, shoved it in the other guy's face and said, "Give me all your shit or I'm gonna blow your head off." It's like, Okay, that's an aggravating circumstance. If you can prove that that happened, if that took place, the severity of, the crime is going to increase. Here it mentions in the slide also that, some situations, some of the circumstances may make it impossible to charge or prosecute a crime. Here, the example was common law, rape of one's wife. Say common law, that was well beyond common law. We moved into relatively recent past, just a few decades back, where rape inside of marriage was not something that was not legally possible. That's not the case anymore, thankfully, but those are some other circumstances. Mitigating circumstances in general, though, basically what you're talking about, you almost start getting into justification. These are the situations at which make the crime in question less serious. Talk about liability real quick, and then I'll talk about the overall theme I want you to get from this section. Okay, so liability. Basically, what we're talking about is you don't have any type of malicious intent, but you still might be responsible for something criminal. Three types: strict, vicarious, and enterprise. So strict, again, you're talking about no intent needs to be proven. Good example of that, statutory rape, those types of crimes where you don't need to have any level of intent proven at all. It's just, did you do this? Yes or no? Okay, that's enough. Statutory rape, you engage in sexual relationship with someone who's under the age of 18, 17, whatever it is in this area. Vicarious, that's where one person is responsible for another. Trying to think of a good example of this. What comes to my mind though is really enterprise. So enterprise is where you're talking about corporations. So it's like, oh, that might be a good one. So from a legal liability standpoint, think of the example I got was policing. So police sergeant, one of the people under him, depending on the orders given, actions taken, that police officer might be held liable for one of his subordinates, one of his or her subordinates' actions. That would be a vicarious liability. Enterprise is where you start talking about organizations, corporations. So an individual of that corporation took some type of criminal action through which the organization or corporation can be held liable for their actions. There's a lot to get into with that one. But the general theme I want you to get from this is how these things fit together. You have act, intent, correlation, and causation. The big lesson is with that is that basically we start talking about is alignment. Alignment is a key thing. So when we're establishing these things, whether you're talking in police or in the courtroom, typically we do it, would be retroductively, backwards. Start out with, here's evidence of Bob. Bob was murdered, right? Bob was murdered by an axe in this location, right? This axe belonged to so-and-so. So-and-so didn't like Bob, and here are the ways that he benefits from his death. Here are his motives. Motives are not intent. Keep that in mind. Motives are reasons why someone might do it. Intent is different. Intent is what that person actually had in mind. And when it starts out from its development in the real world, it goes the other way, right? So in establishing it as an investigation or in court, basically you do it almost backwards. Here in the real world, where things take place, it's the other way, right? It starts out with where your thoughts are. What is your intent? You have a specific intent, you take a specific action. Do those actions align with your intent? Do they get you to you know, the result that you want, right? You know, do you have these two concur? They agree at the same time, they're in the same direction, and do they cause something? Right? So when you talk about murder, it's like, you know, how much thought, how much intent, how much did your thoughts align with your actions? How well prepared were they in taking the specific set of steps that you did? With what specific goal did you get to that goal? And if that is the case, you know, what you see is the better aligned that those things are, the more serious the crime, right? Another way of looking at that is take that same example and look at it with something that's not negative in nature, not criminal. And basically we start talking about is that alignment is a key facet of life itself. With any action that you take, when you take it, you already have some specific level of intent, right? Whether that's you're doing something negligently, recklessly, or you're doing it purposefully, you know, you have that purpose, you let that purpose drive your actions. As you do that, they will lead to certain results. So long as you keep those aligned, you have that type of alignment, you continue on your path. What will happen will be more serious, more influential, have greater power. It will increase the trajectory of your life. The fact that alignment, which you almost look at as like a spiritual alignment kind of thing, that your mental alignment, your purpose that you take with your actions, the better aligned that those are, the better the outcome, the more influence that those things have. That is a very, very important lesson to take from this topic, but it's also one that applies to every facet of your life. It's so much so that we literally instantiated it into criminal law, and it is not to be underestimated. As you're starting this course, I want you to keep that in mind in this course and all of your courses, that alignment is key to everything. And to kind of put it to you all personally, as you're going for your degree, you know, it's about the effort that you put into it, the time, the energy, and keeping that purpose in mind as you take your specific daily acts towards this class and your other classes, towards work, if you work. That alignment and keeping on that purpose is what will drive you to future successes. It is what distinguishes the degree that you will get at the end of your career from a piece of paper that you could print out. Keep that in mind as you move forward in this class. If you have any questions, you need anything, you want to know anything, you can talk about anything, I'm only ever an email away. You'll also see that I put out a virtual office hours discussion in Blackboard. I'll be checking that fairly regularly, probably once every night or two. If you have anything you want to ask there, you think would be good for everyone to see, just put it there and I'll respond to it. And if any of you have an answer to it, feel free to respond, and I might throw a few extra bonus points to those who have good responses. But do not forget that lesson, because it is one that literally will reshape your lives if you let it, if you choose to. But it's got to be purposeful. It's got to be purposely. Again, don't forget that lesson, because it's probably the most important one for you all in general, all of us. With that, great day. I will post out another video when I open up the class for next week. With that, we will move into, let me take a look because I don't remember. I am a one-track mind. We move into anticipatory offense, parties to crimes, so inchoate crimes. Did I pronounce that correctly? Don't ask. I'm horrible at pronouncing things. Well, with that, I'm going to call it an end. Have a great day, and I will see you all soon. And great day. Bye.